All right, welcome back to the show, everyone. Born to be great. This is episode 6. How you feeling, Nick?
I'm good, man. How are you, Dr. Gurner?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Awesome. Well, just a brief background on our guest here today, Dr. Gurner. She is, first of all, I think she's got the best tweets that I've ever seen. So if you're
Thank you.
following on Twitter, and if you're not following on Twitter, go follow her on Twitter. But she's got her doctorate in psychology. She's an executive performance coach. And I'm pretty sure you live on a farm, which is also something that's super awesome about her. And
Do.
very, very grateful that she's said yes to the podcast and having us on here. So if you're interested in becoming a high performer and becoming better at what you do, I think you'll get a lot of value from today's episode. So, Dr. Garner, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. I'm really excited to be here. I'm glad that we're recording early for those of us who are listening who don't know. So we're kicking off early and caffeinated, perhaps.
Yep, getting after it. That's what high performers do. We got to start early, start the day off right.
That's right.
So let's get a little background on you real quick for those who don't know. Could you please tell us a little bit about yourself, what you do now, and anything else that you think would be relevant to the audience?
Sure. Like I started off traditionally in psychology, clinical psychology, and I ended up having the experience where, as a somebody who is in academics, they ask you sometimes to advise on products. And, I had a tech company that wanted some advising on a product, was doing that. And then the venture firm that was supporting them was having a problem with one of their portfolio companies. And they said, hey, we're, this founder, they just raised a huge round. They can't make good decisions anymore. They're kind of paralyzed. Can you talk with them? You're the only person we know who actually has a psychology background. And it wasn't anything I'd ever done. And, this is a guy who had made great decisions, fast moving, very decisive. And, within a few meetings, it was easy to see the problem. It was easy to kind of move him forward. And I felt like, wow, this is something that, usually you think about psychology as moving people from illness to health. And in this case, you're getting people who are incredibly high performers. They are not ill by any stretch. And you're just kind of tweaking and finding these little things that kind of get them back to a high performing position, or they're kind of removing a block that keeps them from kind of performing in the way in which they usually do. And so if you can do that, you can get people, you can really free people up to run in the ways in which, they're kind of innately programmed to go. And that's assuming that the person is someone who's, innately driven and motivated and all that stuff. So after having that experience and doing it once, I thought, this just feels great. Like usually in academics, it takes you forever to get something moved ahead. It's very slow moving and very frustrating. If you work with those who are ill, that journey can take a longer time as well. And it's a very different animal entirely. So, being able to work with people who were, motivated and had all this internal drive, I got all of that research that applies to how you get, kind of ill people well and, deals with the brain, and started just applying little tweaks to people who were already doing incredibly well. And then I started to get, referrals and, other references. I ended up working with a company that did, quite well, ended up selling for like $600 million or something. And then that
Wow.
got me a reputation, and I started to get, kind of other referrals from there. And things just kind of took off. And I was so excited to be in that place. And so now, I'm fortunate enough that, 15 years in or whatever it is right now, that I'm able to work with people who are, top of their field, best of their industry. I've had some NFL clients. So, Nick, the former NFL background, I've certainly had an NFL client. I've had people who are in professional sports, but I also have the majority of my people are people who are in tech, finance, in business and industry. And that's true whether it's in the US or abroad. I've had clients in India and Singapore and all of the UK, various different countries. So now that's kind of what I do, is much like you'd bring in, an engineer to deal with a problem, like you're having an issue with your code and you just want to make sure that things are going well. You bring in people to help to remedy that. I'm someone who's just like the person that, hey, if you're at notch 9, or even if you're at notch 10, probably everyone that I work with would say, everyone else would look at and say, they're amazing. They're doing great things. Company's worth $1 billion or whatever it is. But that person who's sitting in that seat still knows that they have more in the tank. They know they could be doing more than where they are, and they don't understand why they're not doing more, bigger, doing greater things. What's holding them back? And because they can't see it, I think that they're willing to do whatever it takes to have that viewpoint and that vantage point so that they can get to that next level, whatever that is for them. And so it's been a really great journey, and I'm very privileged to do the work that I do behind the scenes.
That is super cool. So you said a bunch of stuff there that I'm like already super curious about. So how you mentioned a few things. You mentioned for yourself when you were doing the work with your first client, how it felt good to you. So I think I
Yeah.
want to touch on that, and also about high performers. They feel like they can still do more. They feel like they still got some gas left in the tank, but they can't see it. How does that work? Like I know for me too. I have coaches that I work with, and I know for myself it definitely works. But for the audience, I want to make this really tactical and
Sure.
something very useful. How does that work, and how can high performers, or even if you're not a high performer, how can we you know get to where we want to go?
So a couple of things. One is I'll just reference your first comment around like, you do something for the first time and you get that kind of sense, you get that feeling. It just feels like your hand fits perfectly in the glove and it's what you're meant to do. I don't think that we always get those experiences in life, but when you do, you should really lean into them. And so for me, I mean, that was kind of my path. It's not something that I would have anticipated when I was in grad school that I would be doing in the future. Graduate school, my area of expertise was adult psychopathology and forensics, right? So I started off in a
Yeah.
very different path than where I ended up going. Still extremes of people, still understanding deep personality characteristics and traits, but just applying that very, very differently. But to your other point about people who are already high performers, I think that the one thing that people should think about with themselves in your audience is, where are you frustrated, right? Frustration is a signal. So if you're kind of bumping upon this frustration with yourself, and this is an area that you should say, okay, well, why am I frustrated? What's going on? What are the things I'm disappointed in myself right now? And usually, if you're really candid, you could list a bunch of things. I'm not making enough money. I don't have the job I wish I did. I don't have the opportunities that I think I should have. And then you start looking at areas where you can take some responsibility. Where are the gaps? What's happening there between the person that you could be and the person that you are right now? And so, there is always a journey, almost always a journey to get there. Barring if it's like, for example, if I wanted to be an NBA basketball player, that's not happening because there's a lot of variables I can't change in that journey. Not the height, the age, the gender. I mean, there's a lot of issues that are not going to shift. But but with other things, like if I said, hey, I really think I should be making 5 times more than I am right now, there's certainly a path to getting there. Because you start to ask yourself questions. Well, if you think you should be making 5 times more, like, okay, well, what are the things that could get you there? What are the skills you have? What are the resources that you have? What are the ideas you have, right? Like, and who do you know? I mean, there's a lot of ways you can start to reverse engineer and problem solve around those things. But usually what I find is that it isn't the skills, because the people I work with are incredibly motivated. They'll teach themselves whatever it is they need to know. It isn't really, so it isn't the skills, it isn't the learning, it isn't the motivation. So what is it? It's the person holding them back is usually themselves, right? Like, so there's something internal that's keeping you from the thing that you truly want. Is it that, I don't know, there's resistance at home around certain variables? Is it that around time? Is it around secondary gain? Like that you get reinforced a lot when I talk about secondary gain. We always benefit from our stuck points in ways we don't realize. And that's something that I think people usually don't examine. We just feel miserable in it, but we don't see why we stay in the misery. And so there, something familiar about where we're at. So there's a lot of areas of challenge that I think people can examine. And I've had a lot of caffeine myself this morning. So if I'm going too fast or saying too much, just let me know.
No, this is awesome. So is that like, I'll ask this, my last question, and then I'll let Nick ask you some stuff. But is that like diving into more of the mindset? Is that not them? I know for me too, like I can remember times where I didn't really have like a vision for my future, and
Yeah.
it was hard to like see where I wanted to go. So like life was just sort of hard. And I think once you get more clear on that, things become a lot easier. Is it stuff like that? Like how would you work with someone on if they're like, I just feel stuck, I don't know what to do, like I don't know where to go? How would you work through some things like that that are, I guess, more tactical, or even things that people could use for themselves?
Well, Justin, I think you hit on something that is absolutely like that's incredibly essential, which is like, what is the vision that you have for yourself? And if you don't have something, there's a saying that you can't, it's hard to hit a target if you don't know what it is or where it is. I mean, like you have to understand where you're going to be able to get there. And sometimes what you can do is, even if you don't know where you're going right now, and the vision isn't that clear, what are the things that are clear to you that you can kind of put your stamp on and say, this is where I want to go? Because one of the things when you say, you don't really have a vision, what that ends up doing is there's a lot of vagaries, right? Like there's a lot of vagueness. And then how do you, it's like living in a fog, right? Like how do you take a step forward in a fog if you don't even, if you can't see where you're going? And the surest thing you can do is to say, look, even in a very foggy day, there's probably one step you can take where you can see where your footing would go. And so you end up saying, well, what's one step I could take toward this thing that I do know I want? So even if you don't have the full vision, you don't know exactly what seat you want to sit in, you don't know exactly what company you want to run, you don't know exactly, like there aren't a lot of things that are clear to you. What is the next thing you can do? What's the next right move that you can make? And usually there's one thing, right? Even if it's exploratory, sometimes that's a really important thing. If you have ideas, usually that's something. Like I would tell people, if you don't have a vision, what's something you want for yourself? Usually someone can name something, right? Like, I want my company to have greater revenue. I want to have, there has to be something. And then you say, well, what's one thing that you could do that could get you a little bit closer to that? And what I find is that if you can take one step and you keep doing that, what's the next right move? You find that like you get to one door, and if you can open that door, there's usually other doors you can see. So if you're willing to take that one step, then there's usually other things you start to see in time, and the fog starts to clear a little bit. But usually what people do is they wait until the fog is completely clear before they're willing to take even one step, because they want to know the whole picture. And I understand that, because we all want assurance. We want to know where we're going. But if you can take one step, usually you start getting a little bit more of the picture. And you kind of trust yourself to be able to take that one step. So, I always say, well, what's one thing that you're sure of? Maybe you just want more money. And then what's one step you can take to explore that, or explore a possible avenue there? What are 4 avenues that could get you more money? Let's explore one of them. You don't have to commit. You don't have to say this is going to be it. You don't have to heavily invest in it, but like one step. And then if it's not right, that's a step you don't have to take in the future. Let's look somewhere else. I can't tell you how many people who are even doing incredibly well, who have, wanted to increase revenue and ended up buying a company, right? They spend $25, $50 million on a company, and they realize, yeah, this isn't going to work. And the ones that are really self-aware, I had a client who I thought very highly of, and he would just cut that thing off like it was dead. And it was always really bold to me, because most people would dig into that $25, $50 million investment and would never let that thing go and spend resources in it and keep dumping into it. And he would just give it all he's got up front. And then, when it didn't work out, he just cut that thing off. And I wrote an article about it in the newsletter, that like nothing should be running on life support. And he really kind of inspired that, because he'll give it a little bit, but he's not going to let things stay on life support in his life, in his business. He's not going to keep giving money to things that are just going to die. And I always thought that took a lot of courage and a lot of boldness, and it's something we should do more of.
Be bold. Yeah, no, I totally agree. All right, Nick, what do you got for Dr. Gurner? I'm like, man, I'm thinking so much right now.
And maybe this is shifting gears, and maybe this is just the stage of life that I'm at. I mean, for a long time, 20 years playing football, that was my only focus. When, I transitioned into my career, I have a beautiful wife, I have beautiful babies. Maybe this is a pattern you've seen with some of your clients or just people over the years, but how do you maintain high performance in your career and also be performing, in your faith, as a husband, as a father, as a friend? Um, that's what I'm trying to solve for in my life. right now because I'm very good at being tunnel vision and just getting shit done
Hmm.
in business and just making things happen. But um, never want that to be at the expense of everything else in my life. And I'm just curious if you've seen this in some of your other clients, and or they might just only care about business. But I'm just curious
I
your
think that's a great
perspective on that.
question because I think that what you get down to really gets at the heart of, the difference between, at least in my experience, what I've seen to be true and kind of what the media portrayal is of what is true. I would say the majority of my clients are happily married, have been married a long time, have families, spend time with those families. I think what ends up happening is at the beginning of their careers, they invest a lot. And so, that's when you'll see the really I call it kind of like periods of intensity, right? And I think the
Hmm.
periods of intensity occur throughout your career, but kind of the initial building blocks where people feel like they have to choose, right, between like, family and being a great husband and being a good father and being a good businessman. I think that that is something that we see in media portrayals. Like you'll see Elon Musk, and he's always doing his things. Or, but I think that the majority of people that I work with are pretty great husbands and pretty great dads. Their philosophy around business and their intensity around that, and being very all in is kind of all in everywhere. Like, I mean, like if they're going to be a dad, they're going to be a good dad. If they're going to be a husband, they're going to try to be a good husband. Um, if they, but sometimes they need reminders around some things, and they have to remember that the priority is the priority. Because I think there's also the tendency to think that being successful around your business is always perceived like being a good husband. And sometimes those things, there's more than just earning money to be a good husband. And I think sometimes people can kind of confuse that because they want to provide well for their families, and they see it as an act of love, as well as some of the other things that people can interpret as loving. A good example is a guy I know who runs a publicly traded company. It's a high demand job. He travels a lot. But he sits down with his wife every month and looks at his schedule, and he has kids, and would say, what are the kind of, where are the kids going to be? What's the sports schedule look like? What are you going to be up to? This is my travel schedule this month. And they actually sit down and coordinate that. And, he makes sure that he calls every night, sees how her day went. She talks to him about his day when he's away. He's very thoughtful, and they're very collaborative. And, at the end of the day, even if he has to be gone a couple of times that month, or whatever his schedule might be, they still feel like they're on the same page. He checks in with his kids. How'd the game go? If he couldn't make it, he tries to make the majority of them and schedule his travel around that. Um, but those are the stories you kind of don't hear. So I think that you can be, and the guy's company's a publicly traded company, is doing all right, but like, still able to be really like all in and tunneled in the business when he's there, and then making sure that he's being thoughtful and intentional outside of that business to make sure he's including his family and doing, fulfilling on his own sense of responsibility when he's not. Um, so I think that the all-in mindset, like if you're somebody who's a former, professional athlete, you can go just like all in, don't see anything else. But I think you also have this great potential to be able to evolve to a place where you can, when you're at work, you can be all in. And when you're at home, you can also be able to kind of turn that focus and be able to be present in the ways that you need to be. And it's just about drawing the right boundaries and also setting up the expectations at home too, like with your wife, and being able to say, hey, I really see this future that could be really exciting for us, but I'm going to need, like, we have to be on the same team here. So like now she's your teammate, and you've got to be able to kind of collaborate together and be on the same page. And then as you're doing the things you need to do, she's on the same page. You help out with responsibilities that are overwhelming, or maybe help to pay for some of those responsibilities to be alleviated from time to time. And, you figure out the thing that's really going to make you happy. Um, and you get, kind of go all in on that. So I don't know what that business venture means for you, but it doesn't mean you have to choose. It just means you have to be thoughtful when you have other people around you and you have new teammates that you didn't have before.
Yeah, that's really good perspective. Justin, did you have questions, or I definitely have a few more.
Well, I think well, I just want to touch on that for a second because you brought up the vision again. So you're selling the vision like to your family.
Yeah.
I think that's super important. And then I'm just curious too, like how much of like the setting the boundaries is more of like being intentional and I guess maybe being more excited about your life versus like discipline. Because I've been in this phase probably the past few years of like first like doing what I'm excited about, like having energy. And I think the best entrepreneurs that I know, like they just outlast people. They got
Yeah.
the energy. I wouldn't say they're the most disciplined people. I don't know if I've ever really believed in that, but like the energy versus discipline thing, and then I'll toss it back to Nick after that because I'm just curious on your thoughts there.
No, you're spot on, Justin. I think that when you're obsessed with something, you don't really need a lot of discipline. Discipline really ideally is for the hard days and for the off days and for those things. But like if you're obsessed with what you're doing, like, to take it back to even an athlete, like there's no way I'd have to say, well, you have to go work out. Like they don't have to, no one has to make them, like they're excited to go. They're excited. Like, my clients have been like thrilled to, like take on internal challenges and things they're going to do. And it has never been a problem. And the same is true with folks in business. Like, I have people who have major medical procedures and they're like, messaging me like, I'm going to be ready to go in like 1 week. I can't wait to get back to it. Like they're excited about it. It's in the blood. It's kind of like it's the thing that they just really get fueled by. And so to me, I'm with you. There's no like, I think that a lot of times it feels tough in social media to say that, oh, you have to be disciplined and you have to do this. And in truth, if you're obsessed, like you're getting up at early in the morning and you're like checking things and excited about what you're doing, no one has to say, well, you have to be disciplined. Make sure that you check your revenue numbers and talk about, no one has to tell people that when you're really in it. I think it's a way of, you can be very successful and be somebody who has to push yourself. But if you really want to be kind of that outlier, you're always obsessed. You're always obsessed. I've never seen an outlier that's not obsessed with what they do. But again, you can be very successful and not have that, but you're not going to get outlier success and not have that. The people that I know, they're obsessed with the things that people would never even think of. Like if for example, like I have clients who do manufacturing and, they do things like, not that this is a product because I'm going to keep him behind the curtain, but like he would do maybe like wall plugs, right? Like something that everybody thinks is really boring, but he's like, oh, I can do all these wall plugs. You can't imagine what they look like. They're in different colors. And now I'm going to do this one that has, and you'd think, who in the world is going to be obsessed with wall plugs? But like this person is. And because of it, they're going to dominate wall plugs. And they're going to go against all those legacy companies that don't care about their wall plugs. And that's just the way that it is. And it's an odd thing, but to me, it's so exciting because you meet so many people who are excited about these niche things. And sometimes it's real estate. People who are doing commercial real estate. Sometimes it's people who are manufacturing. Sometimes it's folks who are in tech and they're really excited about this niche financial product. But they're kind of deep down, I think we're all kind of really nerdy about something. And they allow themselves to just go full bore and just be that person. And, you just love interacting with that person. And again, when you talk about discipline, I think there are days that are hard for everyone. They have to fire people and they're like, I don't want to have a conversation that they need to have, or, those are days when you have to make sure, okay, just make sure you get it done, discipline, making sure that you're good about it. But for the most part, I'm fortunate that most of my clients are just kind of obsessed with what they do and, very unabashed about that obsession. They have to turn it off, not turn it on. Like they have to be mindful, like I have to spend time with, making sure that I'm spending time on the beach with my family over vacation and not doing work, right? Like they're going to be very intentional, but they never have to say, oh, I have to do work. So I have to get disciplined about that.
I love that. Nick, what do you think about that?
Story of my life, man.
No,
But
that's awesome.
Dr. Gunn, I had a few questions for, around folks that have been high performers in the past to get off track. What are small tactical steps they can take to become high performing again?
Yeah, I guess I would
And
want
maybe define high performing. I guess it's top of the field, or I'm just curious how you define it.
I think that there's two things in this, right? Like when you say they've gotten off track, I want to know, how did they get off track? I want to understand like where they went off track, where they feel they went off track. And I want to understand those things too, because that'll tell you a lot about how you get back on it. So, like, what are the things that used to keep them on track? Like, I mean, there's all sorts of things that we think about. And because, I mean, too, I've had people who like switch professions, right? Like they've like done really well. I've had folks who were like on an Olympic team, had an injury, and now they have to do something else, right? Like your whole life has been this one thing, and now you've got to find a way to do something else. And sometimes you find something that's like adjacent, so like they can still get involved in coaching, or like there's things that are very adjacent to the field that they love and that they're obsessed with anyway. And sometimes you think about, well, how do you begin to explore other things when you've been so focused on one thing for so long? So when I think about high performers, I think about people who are, so if I'm defining that, people who are internally driven, internally motivated to be great at what they do and work on being great at what they do on a regular basis, that ends up kind of showing results that you kind of equate that effort. So, they're putting in effort to be great. That effort on a routine basis ends up paying off in a way that is an outsized success compared to peers who are in a similar space. And that's kind of how I think of high performance. There is an average level of performance that we see with people. And I think, honestly, if we look at most average performance, it's probably underperformance. I mean, if you go...
It is underperformance. I'm just going to say it.
All right. Thank you, Justin. So, but even if you go to like the grocery store and you look at the average person who's doing that job, I always think that's a really interesting ground for it, because there's some people who are just clearly like, man, this person is clocking in and clocking out and they don't even want to be here. And there are some people who are like, oh, they go the extra mile. They wrap things for you in a certain way. They make sure that things are in the bag the certain way. They even offer certain things. And like, that's the person that, even if we're in a grocery store, is a high performer in that space. They go the extra mile. They do the extra thing. They're probably the person who'll end up getting promoted. They take the time to be thoughtful and good at what they do. And, like I've certainly talked with people who are starting out like in the startup space, and you can tell who's going to end up being better than the other people that are in that space. Some venture firms, they actually give a certain amount of money. I forget the Reddit Reddit founder's name, Alexis Ohanian. Is part of his investments, for example, he'll give a certain amount toward coaching. And so you get to see, sometimes you'll get to see people fairly early in some of these funds who allow for that. But you'll notice, because they take the time, they do the extra things, they don't feel like, they're just clocking in, clocking out. They're not building a lifestyle business in that way. They're very intentional. And so I think when I define high performers, that's kind of how I look at things. But, I want to know the backstory of how people fell away. But as a psychologist, something I think is always really interesting is how they think about where they were and how they think about where they are. I think a lot of times when people fall away from high performance, there's a few different patterns that they tend to fall into. One is they think their best days are behind them. And so then there's never going to top that. I peaked early, a whole bunch of different things. And they're looking for something to peak that experience or top that experience now, when nothing's going to top it right now. You have to actually get to a place where things will actually top it in the future. I look at even someone like, in a very high example, is a man named Gregory Carr. He sold his company to, I want to say AT&T, for like $800-900 million. And you would think, well, that's the peak, right? Like he sold a voicemail system back in the day, and he's never going to top that. He ends up investing and going on a trip to Africa, and he sees that Mozambique has this like wildlife thing that's like falling apart, and their community is really, poor and struggling. And he ends up committing to like 20 years, spends $100 million of his own money, rebuilds the entire area of Mozambique,
Wow.
restores the wildlife park, flies in all these animals, starts a coffee business with the people that they can sustain, and all this kind of cool stuff. And his legacy is going to be that he is a singular man who has rebuilt this whole area of Mozambique. And you would think that 900 million bucks would be the peak of your experience, but not even close. So there are ways, I mean, that's an extreme example, but there are ways in which we can top ourselves, but it takes time, and expecting that we're going to have, a better result in 5 years when Greg Carr took, maybe 10 years or 15 years to build his exit. He wasn't going to have a great experience a year later. It was going to take some time, and he had to be in for that ride.
All right, so I keep hearing all these reminders of like it's not just about like the skills and the tactic, it's really about the mindset. You even mentioned it when you're talking about the grocery worker. It's like some people are just clocking in and clocking out. Some people are really excited. I don't care if you're flipping burgers at McDonald's or you're the grocery worker. Like if you got that mindset, it sounds like you're going to be successful. So can you talk about, I guess, more about how you maybe develop that mindset? And even for me, I think too, part of my experience was like when I really took like a full ownership mindset of my whole life, it was like when I was sort of sick of my own shit type of thing.
Yeah.
Do you think people got to get there? Or do you think people can just, read a book or like be around some awesome people and flip it on? Like, how do you think people get there, and how can you develop more of that? Because I think I've got some different opinions on that, but I'd be curious to hear your take.
It's a great question. I just want to remind people though that we all hear about NVIDIA, that great chip maker and company, and Jensen. And, he used to be a dishwasher, so I would assume that he's the guy who was in the restaurant, who probably had a better mindset and ended up doing some really amazing things. Today, one of the top companies in the world. But yeah, I mean, I think that when you're talking about mindset, and if people just have to get sick of themselves, I always hope that they don't get to that point, because that's a horrible place to be. Right? I mean, like, it's depressing, it's frustrating. You're kind of at a place where you start becoming, you're pretty desperate. And sometimes that leads people to make bad decisions for themselves too, because they're in such a place of desperation that they're not always carrying the best judgment. But I hope that they never get to that place, because that place is a terrible place to sit in. What I really hope is, like when you talk about developing that mindset, I think there are some things that are innate and some things that are not. And so I'll be really clear that I don't think that you can teach people to be internally driven. I think that's going to be there or it's not. I don't think that you're going to teach someone to be like hungry. I don't know if, like, what I'm saying, like having that internal hunger. I think people are either going to have it or they're not. I've not yet met someone who you can hire who's just kind of lax and blows things off, who you're going to make care deeply. Like, there's some traits that I think you've got to have, but those traits have a double-edged sword too, because if you care deeply, if you're internally driven and you're hungry and you're not doing anything where you're growing, you're also going to be depressed, miserable, and probably pretty angry, just as a baseline. So, I mean, there's always a flip side to all of these too, but channeled in the proper direction, these things can become like just such a monster, because those aren't things that go away, right? Like, you're hungry, you're not going to like do something and then that internal hunger is just going to die. That's why you see guys in business who are in their 70s and they still like are doing things and still in the business, because they're just, that internal drive is still happening. Your body's aging, you're cognitively probably not as at your peak as you could be, but like that drive doesn't stop. So, I mean, I think there's that innate part, to answer that, is one part of it. But I think that the way of developing that is making sure that you are channeling and using everything to push toward things that are productive for you, right? So, I mean, that's where I think that if you are somebody who wants to develop a more high performance mindset, thinking about what are the things that you care deeply about and naming them, because, there's a saying that how you do one thing is how you do everything. And I kind of don't believe that. I think that, I know people who are doing incredibly well in business, but like, are late in paying their own bills at home, right? Like, it's the dumbest thing. So like, they're really good at one thing. They're not great at like their eating habits, right? Not everyone is great at everything, but usually you can choose the things you're going to care deeply about and then really, really go all in on those things. Like, so what do you care deeply about? What are your top priorities? And maybe for me, it's something like, okay, I care deeply about my business. I care about my spouse and my household, and I care about my health. And if it doesn't fit one of those buckets, I don't care about it. Or it's going to be, I don't want to say it that way, but like, it's going to go further down on the list. So, for example, I only have time for so much in my life. And so I have to really be very decisive about what I'm going to spend that time on. And, maybe all the things that I get rewarded for in the community, I'm going to only do one of them. I'm not going to do all of them. I don't have time to volunteer in everything. Maybe I'm just going to choose one thing I'm really passionate about. So having really sharp priorities helps to guide some of the internal drive that you have, and making deliberate choices about the things you do care about. And that's true even in your business. So like if your business is kind of this vague blob of like, oh, it's making money, but it's not as much as I want. And being able to say, all right, well, you have 4 months left of the year. What is one thing that can help to push your business forward that would be the most impactful thing you could do? All right, so now I've identified that I have to get this contract or this partnership or have a partnership or whatever that thing is. Well, now you can use all that hunger and drive and lock into that one thing. And other things are going to be secondary, but you're going to lock right into that. And that's going to be like your mission in life for the next 4 months. And that's what you're going to drive toward. And you can do that even in your career, right? Like you want to move up and you want to be promoted. So you ask your superior or your boss, like, hey, I'm really excited about moving up in the company. What are the things I need to develop? What are the things I need to do to qualify where you would think you would review me for a promotion? Right? Ask the question, and then they're going to give you a list. Well, I think you need to have better communication skills. I bet you need to you have to have a more successful project, or maybe you need to do something with a product or whatever it is. Well, now you have a list. Go hit your list. So there's a ton of things that you can do to channel that to be productive, whether it's in your career or you own a business and you say, look, this is the one thing or the two things I could do before the end of the year. Or it's with your job where you have a list now from your boss to go and hit that. But you have to have that drive. And if you don't feel motivated where you're at, I think that's a signal too. And maybe you need to look for a place where you are. So I think that's really important also, because you're never going to be a high performer in an area that you hate. And you're never going to be a high performer in an area you don't care about. Mm-hmm. So it's something to really think about.
So much wisdom right there. Dang. I'm like thinking about all this stuff. I need to make a list now too, but I've got a lot of stuff going on. Dang. Nick, what are we locking in on? What do you think about that?
Dr. Gurner, you speak with so much clarity. Yes. I think that's probably what I need to implement more on my life, is get clear on what matters the most to me, and be disciplined around putting a list together and executing on it. Sometimes I try to be too busy and try to do too many things, and it's not necessarily it's not effective. So I think I just need to get back to trimming the fat and prioritizing that list. So
I think
you're so wise.
Well, thank you. One thing I gave as an example is that there was a guy. There's a guy I used to work with that I used to speak with, that he used to carry a note card in his pocket every day. And every day he had 3 things on it. How could I be the best CEO I can be today? How could I be the best husband I can be today? And what's one thing I can do to be the best dad I could be? And he'd put one thing under each. And so, for a CEO or whatever, he'd have this one thing that he needed to really focus on. But, sometimes the stuff for his wife or his kid, it would be like, I'm going to send my wife a random text and tell her I love her. Like, it doesn't.
Yeah, it's not huge stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. And like that stuff paid off. And every now and again, he'd switch off his list. And then with being a dad, like, he's like, well, I'm going to play that stupid video game with my kid today that he's been asking me about like 3,000 times that I don't care about. But he'd always have something on each of those areas, those buckets on his list. And I thought that was really super simple, but easy to implement. But also he needed to make sure that as CEO, he was doing the things that he needed to do for his company. And he never lost sight of that as well. But it's knowing, like sometimes for some people, it's really helpful to just make it crystal clear for you and almost have a list that you hit. The great thing is it looks very intuitive, and you end up looking like a rock star. So works out well for you as well.
That's awesome. I'm gonna make my own note card. And if you're listening this far, I'm going to challenge you to make your own note card too, because I'm going to go do that after this. Dr. Gunner, I know we only have a few minutes left here and I want to be respectful of your time. If you had to, I guess maybe leave people with, you know, a piece of advice or two, just to say like, I'm trying to get better at my business. I want to be better, husband, son, whatever, just better in life. What could you tell them? What could you leave them with?
I think that you probably, if you're sitting at home, know that you have the capacity to be more right now. Whether you have the capacity to be better at your work, or the capacity to be a better spouse, or the capacity to be a better dad, or whatever it is. But I would ask you, what does that ideal version of that better look like? Like, what does being better at your business really look like? Like, think about that and get really crystal clear. Like, see what that guy or woman looks like, what they're doing, the kind of actions they're taking, what kind of things are moving forward in that business. And then, move down to spouse. What does that ideal spouse to you look like? What are they doing? How are they behaving? How are they acting? Same with being a parent, if that's really important to you. And so, like, I would really get crystal clear on each of them and then start to say, okay, well, where's the gap between this person sitting right here and who that person is? Like, if the person you see in their business is, hey, maybe this person is making a few phone calls every morning, they're reaching out to investors, there's maybe reviewing opportunities in the real estate market, or they are talking with our product team or reviewing specs, or whatever it is, then start to align to that and make sure that your schedule and what you're doing actually reflects that version of you, because there's nothing that keeps you where you're at aside from the choices that you make. And so just start making different, like, maybe one different choice every day. You don't have to become that person the next day, but start thinking about, like, what's the gap between me and that ideal, me and that ideal, me and that ideal, and start kind of bridging the gap. And if you need help to do that, write out, like, take time, grab a piece of paper and say, look, today, after listening to this podcast, I'm going to write out what the ideal version of myself looks like in my business or my work today. And I'm just going to free write it. Don't think too hard about it and just write it out. And then say, where can I make some adjustments here? And just make a couple. I think that's very easy. It's very practical, because I think deep down, most people know. They know what they are capable of doing. And you also know that it's just you keeping you from that thing. So I would challenge people to push themselves a little bit. And some of those behaviors might be a little uncomfortable or new, but give it a shot.
That's awesome. Nick, what do you got for Dr. Gurner before we close out here?
Keep doing your thing and impacting, these people, these high performers. I mean, I think about a public company, CEO. They probably have a big impact on a lot of people. So you helping them, high perform is helping a lot of people around the world. So please continue doing your thing, and appreciate you hopping on today.
Thank you so much. And Justin, great meeting you as well. Hopefully we'll connect more on Twitter.
Awesome. Thank you, guys.
Have a good one. Bye.